Hello, my name is Kiriath, and today we're going to have a little chat about a couple of things. We're going to have a chat about the interesting changes to Tyranids that are coming in Blood of Baal, and the change to Chapter Approved, which could be interesting, could be good, or, depending on one specific factor, could be kind of garbage. And along with that, the changes to Tyranids, I think, make the Chaos Space Marine Codex worth talking about again, because the Space Marine Codex felt very different to the Chaos Codex, and now the changes that Tyranids are getting kind of make all of the Chaos stuff and the general way things are approached feel a little bit strange now. So, we're going to have, over pre-order next week, all the battle forces. They're going to be up there, some Adeptus Titanicus stuff, and Blood of Baal. Now, in Blood of Baal, there's a cool little thing that Tyranids are getting. So they're getting some updates, getting extra bio artifacts, that kind of thing. Bunch of stratagems. Obviously, they're getting the same treatment as everything else. They say you'll be able to build your own hive fleet with your choice of traits. Again, cool. But that's not all. Adaptive Physiology is a new system bespoke for the Tyranids that lets you represent the myriad adaptations of the Great Devourer. A Carnifex with Synapse, a pack of camouflaged Tyranid warriors. It's all possible thanks to Psychic Awakening. Now, the ability to build your own hive fleet, the ability to essentially build your own successor chapter, these are both incredibly useful and very flavourful things. And it feels like they've taken things a step further than was done in the Chaos Space Marines Codex, which is interesting because it feels like there has been a change in approach to design, whereby customization is now the name of the game. Previously, it was a case of, okay, so you want to have your own Space Marine chapter, that's great. You can pick from being a successor from these, and that's what you get. Choice has been slowly expanded, but really the ability to create a chapter that properly suits your vision of what your army is only properly showed up in the last Space Marines Codex, in terms of sheer flexibility, in terms of just being able to fully customize your personal army. Now, of course, Tyranids are getting the same thing here. Be able to build your own hive fleet with your choice of traits, which is excellent, but it's going a step further, whereby you can mess about with the adaptations of your Tyranids. Again, it's taking that customization feel a step further. These feel like a different, like an extension of what we've seen before in terms of allowing you to have the army that you really want to have. And it feels like a conscious shift away from what we saw in Chaos Space Marines. Now, don't get me wrong, there is customization in there. It's not like it's completely lacking in what you can do, but it's not on the same level as this. It's not on the same... It feels like a slightly different philosophy for coming up with how you approach people who have their own armies and do not want to play established chapters, established hive fleets, established warbands. It feels different to that. Now, a lot of this stuff is actually pretty big and stuff that I think ordinarily you'd expect to see in a new codex. And it's going to be interesting to see how much of this stuff is incorporated and how it's refined, or whether it's simply expanded on again when we get fresh codexes this time around. So we've got the new Space Marines Codex. We've basically been through the loop at this point. We're back at the starting point of just codex release cycle. So it'll be interesting to see whether this remains the norm or whether this suddenly gets way bigger when we have new codexes coming out for races. Now, obviously I have no idea like who is getting a codex next or anything like that. I've not heard anything about that. None of my sources that I've got have said anything about it. We do have the source that recently told us that we'd be seeing a bunch of like 8.5 codexes. Although I have to admit, part of me is starting to see Psychic Awakening as essentially like 8.5 in a way. They are taking established stuff, things that have worked, things that have been kind of started with the codexes and then extrapolated on them. They've made them more of a thing than they were previously, which feels like almost a soft update to those codexes. It's going to be interesting to see whether all that stuff sticks around. Now, that's a positive change. That's a cool change. I really like that. Being able to properly adapt Tyranids so that they can have all sorts of funky stuff going on makes total sense for that army. And one of those things, it's like reading it, it's like a Carnifex with Synapse, a pack of camouflaged Tyranid warriors. I kind of looked at it and went, Oh, you couldn't do that before, could you? I mean, I don't have a Tyranids army. I know a few people who play them, but I just been like, it suddenly struck me as, why has that not been a thing previously, given that, well, it's all about adaptation, and yeah, it makes complete sense, and it's nice that they've got something that, again, gives you the chance to completely customize and make it your own. Now, that's a positive thing, right? Something that may or may not be positive is chapter approved. So chapter approved will be up as well, and chapter approved is a weird one this time round because they've separated it into 2 books. So what I'll do is I'll show you. There you go. So as you can see, whatever Warhammer 40,000 army you play, you want to get a copy of this year's chapter approved, the essential annual update, and they've separated it into 2 bundled books for your convenience. So it's worth pointing that out. They are bundled. So new missions and ways to play in chapter approved 2019, and then build your match playlist in the Munitorum Field Manual. Oh my god. Munitorum Field Manual. I can read. Get out. A reference guide with points for everything currently in Warhammer 40,000. It doesn't just contain updated points, but unchanged ones too, meaning you'll only have to look in one place when writing your lists. Now, that's a weird one, and that's a weird one because I've seen so much back and forth, and there's been such a divide of opinion between this. It seems to swing wildly between actually having the 2 separated into 2 different books is kind of convenient for me. I don't necessarily need both at the same time. I might not need to even take chapter approved to certain things. I might not even need to take the field manual to certain things, because if you've got your army list already sorted, then do you really need to take it with you? You can just leave it where it is. It's 2 slimmer volumes instead of 1 big chunky book. Therefore, travelling around with the one that you need is better. But then I've also seen on the flip side, it's now separating the thing that I just had in one place into 2 things, which is just slightly more irritating. And there is the biggest factor, I think personally, which is cost. And if it's the same price as the previous chapter approved, if it is just that much for 2 books that contain the same amount of stuff as previously 1 book contained, then that is absolutely grand. That's fantastic, and to be honest, that wouldn't bother me too much. Admittedly, on the one hand, yes, there was talk about making things less bloated. There was talk about making things a bit less like you had to carry a small library around when you wanted to play 40k. And having 2 books instead of 1, you could argue, kind of goes against that. However, is that necessarily the case if you don't actually need all the contents of the 1 book that previously contained all the information from the 2 books? If you already have your list sorted, if you have, say, 2 versions of it, you're taking your army to wherever, you're taking it to Warhammer World, you've got your list fixed, you've got it written down, you've got it printed out, you've got it on your iPad, your phone, whatever, and you've got that sorted, and you don't need the points, then what's the point in carrying the points around with you if you're not going to use them? At which point, if you want to use stuff out of chapter approved, if you want to try different missions and stuff like that, well, carrying 1 book that is smaller and lighter than the previous, book was last time, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you want to take both of them, you've actually got, in a weird way, added bulk and added nonsense, because, the binding on these, it increases how big they are, obviously. Stuff like that adds, in a weird way, weight and bulk to these things. At which point it suddenly becomes less convenient, because it's previously I just had the 1 thing, and now it's 2, which also fully opens up the possibility of leaving one somewhere. Let's be honest, we've all left a codex somewhere. It's happened to everyone. You think you've got all your stuff, you've packed your bag, you've got your army in your case, you leave, you get home, and then you go, oh great, now I need to buy a new codex, unless someone has been kind enough to pick that up and not assume it's theirs, or someone hasn't wandered off with it, or it's just got lost somewhere and I don't even know where I put it. That could be a thing, but really to me it just comes down to price, and that's about it. It's one of those things where it's very dependent on the person who is getting it as to whether this is more or less convenient, whether it's more or less bulk, and whether you consider it more or less bloat in terms of books. If it's the same price, it doesn't bother me at all, because all it's doing is separating the thing into 2 things, and if you don't need one of those things, then fine, you don't need to cart it around. If it costs more, if chapter approved is now more expensive because it's been separated into 2 books, I would argue that's not the way to go, because you could have just kept it as one, kept the price fixed, and that wouldn't have been an issue. No one would have complained about that. I think the main thing is that I don't think anyone has asked for this. I don't think anyone has sat there and gone, can we separate a bunch of stuff out of chapter approved and make it its own book? I've not seen that as like a request from anyone. So it feels like one of those, we've made a change. We don't know whether you even need it. No one's asked for it, but we've done it anyway. It kind of feels like that. As long as it's presented as a change that is of no extra inconvenience or cost to anyone, I think it's fine. If it goes up by a tenner because it's 2 books, much like the Space Marines Codex went from being a codex, and then suddenly it was a codex unless you were playing a certain chapter, in which case you then needed a supplement which brought the cost of the codex up, that's not quite as good. But this just feels like a thing that is convenient for some. Most people aren't going to care, and some people really don't like the idea of more books. I'll be honest, I prefer fewer books, but you know, if that's what works for the most people, fine, it doesn't bother me too much. It's all going to come down to the price, though. More than anything, it's going to come down to the price, because prices have been creeping up steadily. They've been creeping up constantly. If this is just a thing whereby it's like, okay, we've separated into 2, and now it's going to cost £10 to £15 more, that's not great. But we'll see. We'll see when we get prices through, which I'm sure will happen. What are we on, Monday? They'll probably show up tomorrow. They usually show up a good 5-6 days before this stuff goes up for pre-order, so we will know soon enough. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think about the separation of those 2 things for chapter approved, whether you can consider that a good or bad idea. Don't care either way. That's fine too. And the changes to the Tyranids, and whether that's going to be something that we'll see more of in upcoming codexes. As codex is refreshed, we're going to get more and more options, more and more customization. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. As always, you can click the things, Patreon, video subscribe, all that stuff. Click it if you like, don't click if you don't want to. And there's an affiliate link for Element Games in the description, whereby you can buy stuff from there for a lot cheaper than if you bought them from Games Workshop. And I get something for saying you that way, and 10% of what you spend goes to charity at the end of the month. So, yeah, it's a nice way to help the channel, but it's totally up to you. I leave it in your capable hands. I will see you for the next one. Toodaloo.